Hi, this is Steph Mischuk with KillerPHP.com. It's a sunny day today, and so I'm wearing my shades. I hope it doesn't distract you too much. In this video tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to MySqL. MySqL is a relational database. I'll explain to you in a moment what a relational database is. It's a database that's commonly used with PHP to power database-driven websites. Let's start off first by describing what exactly a database is. In a nutshell, a database is a virtual filing cabinet. It's a place where data is organized and stored. Relational databases are a type of, well, let me back up before I get into relational databases. So databases are essentially programs. They're software that are written to easily store, organize, and retrieve information. They have all kinds of built-in capabilities that make this easier. And as we get into MySqL and working with MySqL and PHP, I'll introduce you to a couple of these capabilities. So MySqL is the de facto standard database that's used in the PHP world. Although we have many other options, PHP is very flexible in that it can connect or work with many different types of databases that are like MySqL, things like Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, Access, and there are many others. But because everybody uses MySqL and because most web servers provide access to MySqL out of the box, it makes sense to work with that particular database program. As I mentioned before, MySqL is a relational database. So what does that mean? In a nutshell, MySqL organizes its data by establishing relationships, thus relational. It establishes relationships between different pieces of information. I'm not going to go into it much more than that because it's really not important for our concerns at this point. Just understand that there are different styles or different ways in which you can store data, and one of those ways is the relational way, thus relational database, and MySqL happens to be a relational database. Some other ways include flat file systems, include object-based databases, and there's a few other types I believe, but the most common by far is the relational database and maybe a flat file database. You do have some object-oriented ones out there, but those are usually used in very specialized situations, so we won't get into that. Anyhow, MySqL is a relational database. Relational databases organize their data by creating relations, think family relations, between different pieces of data. And again, when we get into actually using MySqL with PHP, we're going to see how this works. Before we jump in and actually create our very first database, I just wanted to clarify a few more points about databases. Databases, relational databases, will organize its data in a series of rows and columns. It sort of looks like in an Excel spreadsheet in many ways if you were to visualize it. And actually you'll see that a lot of the tools that are used to interact with MySqL, when I'm talking about tools, of course, I'm talking about software, you see that a lot of these tools will actually present the database in terms of rows, visual rows and tables, much like an Excel spreadsheet. The difference between a spreadsheet and a database is that the spreadsheets has sort of semi-database-like capabilities, but spreadsheets are really more for manipulating data for the sake of presentation, for things like generating graphs and so forth. Whereas the database is actually meant more to more efficiently store and organize large amounts of data and information, and then it makes it easy for you through various tools that they have built into these database programs. They have all these capabilities that makes it easy for you to insert, update, delete, and filter this data. that's a question that came up in my mind in the past, because if you look at it superficially, a spreadsheet looks a lot like a database, and since you can hold data and store data in spreadsheet, it's hard to see the difference. The major difference is that spreadsheets are meant to manipulate data for the sake of presentation, graphs, charts, yada yada, whereas a database program, its job really is to store data very efficiently and very quickly so that the data can be pulled out and filtered very efficiently and very quickly. Hi, as you can see, the sun has passed me by, and I'm no longer wearing my shades. But anyway, what we're going to do now to conclude this video is we're actually going to create our very first database using probably the most commonly used program used to interact with MySQL. And this is something called php-myadmin. php-myadmin is something built with PHP and allows you to do just about anything you can do to MySQL. Again, there are many other programs out there that do the same thing, and php-myadmin is not necessarily the best, but it's the most commonly used by all the hosting companies out there. So it's likely if and when you get around to building a PHP, database-driven site in PHP, chances are you're going to have php-myadmin to use to set up your database. Fortunately for us, MAMP, which is on the Mac, and WAMP, which is on the PC. We've seen MAMP and WAMP before. They use php-myadmin as well. So what I'm going to do now is launch php-myadmin using WAMP. So I'm going to just go into the php-myadmin directly as so. And here we go. This is the basic php-myadmin screen. It's depending, there's different versions of php-myadmin. I'm using, of course, 2.11. And depending on the version, you're going to have a different layout. And depending on your server, they may set it up and configure it in such a way to restrict certain access to you. But whatever. What we want to look at here is on the side, it lists the various databases that are now in the system. You see I created a test one, I created a test for WordPress. The MySQL database is it's the core database that MySQL itself uses to keep track of itself. So you basically don't want to touch that one. And you probably don't want to touch this one either, because that's what php-myadmin uses, I would imagine. For the sake of this lesson, you want to find a create new database text box, and you want to put in a database. So I'm going to put in a database, and I'm going to call it killer. Collation type, this has to do with the way MySQL will store its data. For the sake of our lessons, just leave it like this. We're going to get our defaults, and we're going to hit create. So we see we got an SQL query. Now I'll get into this again when we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the code in another video, but we know we've created a database called killer. And if we go back home, you see killer is here. Now if you notice, beside each of the databases we have a number. So schema is 17, killer has 0, MySQL has 17, php-myadmin rather has 7. What this means, well, what this number tells you rather, is how many tables are in the database. This is something new if you haven't touched databases before. Relational databases store the information in tables, one or many tables. You can have as little as one table in a database, or you can have as many as as many as you want. You can think of a table as being a container for a category information, if you will, inside of your database. Again, this is very broad, theoretical gibberish right now, and I don't want you to get caught up on this. I just thought I should introduce this. You can actually create tables as well using php-myadmin. With that said, let's actually create our very first table. So I'm going to select the killer database, And it's right here, create new table on database killer. So I'm going to create a table. I'm going to put call it books, number of fields. Now fields, number of fields, it's basically your columns. If you have a spreadsheet, you got your columns and your rows. A field is a column. So how many columns? That depends on, so how many fields should you put in depends on the type of data you want to store. Again, I'm not going to get into the theoretics now. I don't want to do that because I'd rather just show you and help you to understand the theory as we actually build our own tables. But for now, I'm just going to say number of fields 3, and I click go. And we get a lot of other options that we'll get into later on in which you can use to build your table. Anyhow, that's it for now. I actually didn't create the table because I didn't fill in those options. But we introduced you to the basics of MySQL. You understand that it's a relational database and so on. And I've introduced you to PHP-MyAdmin, this product right here. And you know that it's the most commonly used interface or program that talks to and works with a MySQL database.